It's very hard to take this $1.6 trillion industry that we're all in and take a topic like AI, which is impacting so many things, and break it down into small, bite-sized pieces that you can metabolize. If I'm talking to operators to try and narrow their view by asking two key questions. How do you, number one, increase the time the physician can spend with the patient? The second thing is, how do I put a tool in that has ROI?
This episode of Vital Conversations is produced and distributed by Be Connected, a social media management firm in Northeast Wisconsin.
Hi, I'm Tim Cohen. Welcome to Vital Conversations, brought to you by Focus Solutions. Here we talk to industry leaders about what's going on in their corner of healthcare, specifically as they intersect with IT and data. And I'm really pleased to have as our guest today a friend, Jeff Freedman. Jeff, thanks for being on Vital Conversations.
Thank you very much for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Jeff, you're currently the Director of Private Equity Engagement with ModMed, which will inform part of our conversation, but you had a long prior career as an actual working operating executive. Give people just a quick sense of your background before we get to what will actually be a funny conversation of two old guys talking about AI.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I actually, for preparation, look back, and it's been about 30 years in healthcare, and I've done a lot. I've been in a payer scenario. I've been at a manufacturer. But as you said, I've been mostly on the operating side. And that's everything from answering the phone to really managing a team to being a CEO of a platform business. So my lens tends to be from the operations of the practice. How do we make it efficient? How do we see patients more efficiently? How do they have a better experience?
So, yeah, we're going to talk about AI. And again, it is kind of funny. I didn't think you could, if you remembered Ronald Reagan, you couldn't speak about AI, but it is that operator's point of view, especially now setting at a large technology company like ModMed, that I think gives you a really, really unique lens on this question. Because clearly AI is hotter than donut grease. It's everywhere. But from 100,000 feet, as you talk with practice executives, kind of what would you say to them, before we get into some particulars on how do they make sense out of this world that's changing so fast?
Yeah, so you hit on a couple of things there. I think the first one is the velocity. It's very hard to take this $1.6 trillion industry that we're all in and take a topic like AI, which is impacting so many things, and break it down into small, bite-sized pieces that you can metabolize. But I think about it, if I'm talking to operators, to try and narrow their view by asking two key questions. As you think about your operation, how do you, number one, increase the time the physician can spend with the patient? Right now that either means I'm going to see more patients or I'm going to go from 15 minutes to 20 or to 30. The second thing is, how do I put a tool in that has ROI? Everybody is compressed in terms of margin. And if you cannot find an application, some type of improvement mechanism that adds ROI, I think you're going to struggle. So those are the two things that I tend to try and take this massive industry and boil it down to sort of two swim lanes that people can think about.
Well, the irony about those two questions is, with our business hat on, they seem unbelievably obvious starting points. But if you look at the 15 years of healthcare kind of defined by the High-Tech Act, we went from one of the notoriously least automated industries and then this rapid adoption. But it's like we forgot at the beginning to ask those two questions. We took the physician away from the patient and we spent money and never thought about the ROI. So here you are asking like good old fashioned run your business well questions, and you look like a savant because as an industry, we just kind of lost that. as we just rush to adopt technology's sake.
Yeah, for sure. And think about how we typically answer problems as an operator. You recognize something and you say, I've got two solutions. I'm either going to hire somebody or I'm going to add technology. Those are the two things we did. And if you think about what usually happened, it usually meant we hired somebody. Let me give you a stat that I heard the other day that I think is really telling. From 1970 to today, there's been a 150% increase in physicians. That makes sense. There's a lot more physicians today than there were in 1970. From 1970 to today, there has been a 4,000% increase in administrators. This isn't meant to badmouth or to put down somebody who's doing the administrative job. We know why we've added people, the amount of compliance and regulation and all the things we've got to do. But that has been the answer. And so I think we now step back and say, this is the most exciting time for us because we have a real opportunity to get out of this labor addiction that we have.
Yeah.
I think it's
So
real.
now, so now you bring that operator's background and you're setting inside a technology company where one, the core operating systems of physician practice, PM, and the EHR that are at the center. Um, and you guys are making investments, in okay, how do we bring AI to that? Let's talk about, one of your clear passions is the patient experience. Um, Talk about some of the things that you see that you're really excited about on the front end, even though we're very early in this process, where AI can change the experience for the patient. And then we'll talk about
Yeah,
for the physician.
for sure. I think everything in the AI conversation for ModMed starts with this idea of structured data. Something like a third of the data in the world is in healthcare, and 80% of that data is unstructured. So if you have structured data, which essentially means I can take pieces of it and I can put it into defined labels within a system, I really have the ability to look at everything that I've already done with the patient or everything that I will do with upcoming patients. So, from our perspective, we're trying to make this a much easier experience, an opportunity to get rid of drudgery. So, anybody who's gone to a physician's office has got to fill out forms and they've got to say hi to Pat at the front desk. And there's sort of a template there. But if you can pull pieces out of that allow for that patient to have a much more real and authentic interaction with the front desk and then the physician, I think you really take the satisfaction score up. So for our perspective, it's taking our structured data, using that to pull drudgery out of the system, the
Right.
process, and then increasing the human touch that really changes the way you view your physician.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to go back to your stat on the 4,000% increase in administrators. That doesn't even count the amount of work we offloaded to the patients, right? It
That's
always
right.
it always just bugs the heck out of me when I see a physician I've seen regularly going, my birthday's still my birthday. My wife is still my emergency. I rewrite this stuff down and somebody on your side does something with it. And we just keep doing that over and over again. So drudgery is kind of a code word for what to attack there. How about for the physicians? You mentioned the goal of trying to increase their time with the patient. We also know that in our adoption of technology, we just took a hammer to physician satisfaction when they felt like, I went from the highest license in the chain to now I'm the data entry clerk. Talk about some of the things you guys are trying to do for the providers and their experience in the process.
Yeah, let's be very specific here because the way you frame that, I think it makes a ton of sense. This is this idea of I want to interact with you as a patient. I'm a physician, but I've got to document a number of things that are being said. That documentation is critical, not only because you need to have, risk and compliance and things written down, but it allows you to step back and make your diagnosis. Disclaimer, I'm not a physician, But I do think that this idea of having to get all the details about the way the patient presented their disease state or their concern is a time crusher. So you've hired a ophthalmology tech if you're in ophthalmology, you've hired an MA in orthopedics. What we and many others, but I think what we've done probably using our structured data source is add this ability to document what's being said, which is simply just the recording component, but pulling pieces out of that to actually help the process of processing that patient. What does that mean? That means things like a prescription, things like an X-ray, things like I want you to come back every 2 weeks, a scheduling of follow-up. Those types of components come out of that conversation. They get documented, and then they get slotted within the EMR. That hits on our very first basic fundamental point, which is I can spend more time if I'm a physician with a patient. So I think this is sort of sort of base case for the use of ambient listening. And I think we've really got a good, strong approach to that. I think what we've heard so far is very positive results.
The ambient listening innovation, at least many of the physicians I talked to, is like one of the first technology things we've done to them that they are really, really excited about. And having experienced it as a patient, when my doc just hit the button, never broke eye contact, we just talked about my situation. It's like, oh yeah, this is the way it was supposed to be, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you think about it, here we are talking face to face, at least electronically, and there's a recording that's happening. That kind of thing is a part of our daily life.
Yeah.
We have people sending ChatGPT a message saying, how do I do this? It makes total sense that it would translate and spill into the way we interact with the patient. And to your point, this doesn't make it less personal for the physician. In fact, it makes it much more personal. It's one task that the physician doesn't have to do or the MA doesn't have to do, which allows for us to be much more connected.
Let's talk about a third leg in the stool, which is the rev cycle in healthcare is possibly, designed by angry engineers. It's so complicated, but it's important to get our providers paid. So we talked about the patient experience, the physician experience, maybe a third leg to address. What are you guys doing to make the process of turning care into cash a little bit easier?
Yeah, I like that care into cash. Everything starts with a claim that is denied.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say it starts, but where's the bottleneck? We did the procedure, we did the care, we did the code, we sent it in, and for whatever reason, it was denied. The clearinghouse denied it, the payer denied it, it wasn't prior auth. So our approach really on the focus of denials is how do we start to predict that when you send that claim in with those types of pieces of information attached, is going to be denied.
Right.
Once you start to predict that,
Yeah.
you don't make the mistake again.
What do you want to do to fix it on the front end as opposed to
And
starting
then,
the process where you make an interest-free loan to United Healthcare, which no doctor wants to do, right? It's like,
that's exactly right.
That's what you're doing, right? You're letting them hold
And
your money. Yeah.
spoken like a true revenue cycle guy. I think while I said that the bottleneck is the denial, it starts on the front end. So
Right.
how do you do all the right things so that really a clean claim goes out? So our approach has really been identify where these bottlenecks are on the denial component, and then that drills back into educating the staff on what needs to be done to get it clean.
We've long said to physicians on the rev cycle side, you're bringing a knife to a gunfight because the payer is so outspending you on technology and data. And we look at the AI side of things, and we know they are literally spending billions of dollars. And we're pretty sure most of that is not trying to figure out how to pay the docs faster. So you guys are at least trying to hey, can we balance that a little bit more in the provider's favor on the rev cycle side, right?
Yeah, for sure. And let me be a tad unpopular for a moment. I did say that I worked for a payer for about
Yeah.
5 years.
Okay.
And what that showed me was exactly how they are trying to process claims and get them paid. What I will tell you is while there is a negative perception of the payer, what is more the case is they haven't really got all their systems tied together. So if you're using AI and you can start to predict on the front end, so at the practice level, what they're looking for, think, imagine how much more efficient that makes you. So payer's a bad guy, but the more organized and the more precise we can be
Yeah.
about the delivery of a clean claim,
Right.
I mean, the translation is obvious, it's dollars.
Like you're right, and I tease. It's okay, we forgive you. Even Luke flirted with the dark side for a while, but it's not in the pay. It's actually not in the payer's interest for them to have to touch the claim over and over again as well, right?
It is.
So,
That's
all
exactly
right,
right.
the final question I want to ask you comes with a confession that, as part of ModMed, you have a dog in the hunt on this question, but that's okay. The argument for AI embedded in your PM and EMR as opposed to a third party, because these products are just coming at practices literally at the speed of heat. Um, Make the case for why you would say to a physician practice executive, hey, look, uh, you got to think about this as opposed to just hanging a bunch of ornaments on the tree. What would you say?
Yeah, I think that the key word in your question is embedded.
Yeah.
Well, what does embedded mean? Workflow is A to B, B to C, C to D. If I add something into that workflow that forces me to come out of what I'm currently doing, add a step, and then go back to what I was doing before,
Yeah.
that doesn't define efficiency for me.
No, it
So,
doesn't.
so when you're embedded, you're basically taking the established workflow, and in many cases, you're removing one of those steps.
Right.
So instead of A, B, B, C, C, D, it's just A to C, and B is done in an embedded way by automating some form of the process. So to summarize, this is sort of thinking about, do I automate? Do I eliminate? And do I augment what is currently there? So those three things are how we think about an embedded process, and it makes a massive difference versus a bolt-on application that forces you to come out of your existing workflow.
So final question. Go back to your old operator days. You're talking to a practice administrator. If you had to give them just kind of like, here's a something to think about as you evaluate AI in your practice. Do you have a rule of thumb? Do you have a principle that you would say, kind of start here and this will get you pointed in the right direction?
Yeah, I think that the environment created at a practice, if it's open to three words that I just used, which is automate, augment, or eliminate, I think what you did is an administrator going to a physician saying, before we hire another person, I think we can automate this process. Think differently. We started this conversation with me saying, how do we problem solve? Well, we're going to hire somebody, we're going to do another piece of technology. Think differently. How can I automate? How can I augment? Or how can I eliminate a process or somebody that may be better utilized to do something else? I think that framing is a whole different way of looking at healthcare. And I'll end by telling you, you joked about a couple old guys talking about AI. Yeah, but I'll tell you something. This is the most exciting period in healthcare that I've experienced in 30
Right.
years by far. And it is so fascinating to stay up to date on it. It's so interesting to try and learn. And you can't be an expert, like my daughter, who's 22, told me on
Yeah.
Father's Day. You can't be an expert, but you certainly can learn on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to those first two questions, why this is exciting time. We can increase the amount of time we spend delivering care, and we can deliver a positive ROI. Uh,
Without
Jeff, thank
question.
you very much for sharing your perspective. Again, unique from long time as an operator, now sitting inside a technology company trying to do this stuff. Thanks for being on Vital Conversations.
Great conversation, Tim. Really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Take care. Vital Conversations is presented by Focus Solutions. Focus provides integrated IT data and software services to physician practices all across the United States. To hear more stories about physician practice leaders and what they are doing, subscribe to Vital Conversations wherever you get your podcast.